you had a question you wanted me to address. You want to
Yes,
go for it?
I haven't looked up in my glossary, so I've been lazy, but I've been curious what you think is the answer to the question, what is the difference between the collective conscious and the collective unconscious? So we're only talking about the collective aspect of the psyche.
The collective conscious we can see on cable news every night. The collective unconscious, we can't see what's motivating what's on the news every night. Okay, and so, for example, when someone creates a scapegoat, okay, for whatever reason, they say, it wasn't me, it was that guy over there, okay, that did such and such. It's their fault. Whenever they're doing that, what they're doing is they're feeling huge internal guilt. I mean, this is my opinion. So anybody out there in YouTube land is welcome to answer this also. But from my perspective, they have unconscious guilt, which is very painful to hold internally. And so therefore, they create a scapegoat. Okay.
That would be a projection.
A projection. They put it outside themselves. And this is, scapegoat is an actual thing. I mean, going back thousands of years, actually, there was the practice of taking a goat, literally taking a goat, and putting it outside the village, staking it down, staking it outside the village, and saying, you know, all of my negative ideas go to that goat. They project it on the goat. They blame everything on the goat. And then they would leave the goat to be killed by a lion or whatever was out there. But then they would escape their personal responsibility for whatever the situation was. And so whenever we're blaming someone, there's lots of blaming that goes around on cable news, regardless of what station you watch and regardless of which party you favor. And in every case, that demonstrates a lack of individuation and a feeling of guilt that someone feels they have to put the guilt on somebody else so that they don't have to carry it in their psyche. And I guess.
So wouldn't that be the personal unconscious, though, working in that person rather than the collective unconscious? In other words, give me an example of a collective unconscious position or entity.
From an American political point of view, we could say that the current administration was elected because of the collective shadow. Okay, in other words, as I said, believe it or not, I said this in the third meeting of this group, so you can find it back in year 1 of our videos in session 3. Everybody has been put down by somebody in authority, and whoever they are. I mean, you've been told to go to the principal's office or whatever it is in your lifetime. Everybody's been punished for some wrong. When Donald Trump comes up and says during his campaign, you know, I'm going to stick it to the authorities. I'm going to drain the swamp, you know, and I'm going to fix it like that. Everybody says, yeah, okay, or a lot of people do, okay, because they're saying, you know, my life hasn't been very good lately, particularly not since the crash of 2008. So I'm angry at the authorities. And so if somebody's going to shake up the authorities, boy, that's for me. And so that's in our shadow, and a lot of people voted that way in the American election. And so that's the collective acting out. Then, oh, by the way, we get hugely surprised when we vote one way, and then the guy you voted for does the opposite of what he said he would do. And that's an issue.
So does the collective conscious relate to the collective unconscious on a case basis? In other words, the same flavor that we're talking about is in people's collective unconscious. Does that come out somehow as a part of the collective consciousness then, or what's the dynamic that works?
Well, I mean, it's all process, right? It's psychological process, and it's flowing around. And here's one issue for all of us, which is none of this has been very well researched. I mean, Dr. Jung did what he could in his lifetime, obviously, but even at the end of his life, when he was interviewed by the BBC, he says, we know nothing. We know no thing about the unconscious. And so there are universes of information, of knowledge, that we don't know how these things work. Okay. And so what I believe is, of course, I'm highly intuitive. So I end up testing on the MBTI. I test in the 99th percentile on the intuitive scale. Most men aren't even in the intuitive scale, but I happen to test way out on the end of that scale. And as an intuitive, I believe it's possible to know when the mood of the country changes. I mean, actually, this was covered in the movie The American President, where they're talking about some sort of polling that had gone on, and one of the advisors says, well, the country has mood swings, right?
I like that.
and somebody else says, mood swings? Well, yes, it does. Okay. And you can tell when the mood swings. And, a very obvious one in the past week, regardless of your position on this issue, is the children being separated from their parents at the border. Obviously, the mood of the country got very much darker when that happened. That was so obvious you couldn't escape it. And that wasn't just one person. That wasn't individual people. That was people everywhere objecting, except the people who are totally sycophantic to the president. But everyone else said, this is just not morally right. And you could feel the mood of the country change. Things don't change without emotion, I think. I think that's fair enough to say. I mean, you can write all kinds of rational books. I have a whole bookcase of them here. Debbie has a whole bookcase of them there. We can memorize all the books and rationality that we want in our lives. But, unless something is goring my ox, unless the ox is being gored, I don't tend to change. I tend to live my life more or less the same every day. But if something's really bothering me, then I'm going to change. And so we see it. We saw it when the Parkland high school kids started to react to the fact that 17 of their classmates had been killed in this shooting back in April. And we're seeing it now with this issue. We saw it when the president was inaugurated, and the following day there was this huge demonstration. And we're going to see it this weekend On June 30th, there's a scheduled demonstration. So we can actually see the emotion that moves people to get out of their chair and physically go out and represent themselves in a crowd. Okay, and we used to think that all issues could be resolved rationally. Well, no, they can't. And things are only going to change when people are emotionally invested enough so that they change them. Basically, I guess that's what I would say. Andrea says, I think that the collective unconscious is further down. It's like our operating system. It's the deeper machination and the things that drives religious experiences. Well, it certainly is that, Andreas. I agree with that. And he says, collective consciousness is like a shared opinion. Yep, I agree with that too. Dr. Jung made a point when he was interviewed of saying that, the unconscious is really unconscious. And so I'm not saying everyone can close their eyes and know what the mood of the country is. I'm saying I can know, okay? I know because I'm intuitive and, I can read the tea leaves and know what's going on. And, we're talking about a dichotomy within the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And on one side are sensing people, and on the opposite side are intuitive people. And sensing people, you have to show them 1,000 trees, and they still don't believe there's a forest. Whereas intuitive people, you can show them 3 trees, and they assume there's a forest. That's the difference on the extremes of that duality. And so it depends on where you fall in the percentiles on that duality, whether you can know what the mood of the country is, or what, and, it's just, I just know. And I don't know why I know, but I often predict things that turn out to be true. And then Andrea says, maybe another word for collective consciousness is zeitgeist. Yeah, we've heard that word bantied about lately in the last decade or so. I don't think it's very meaningful to most Americans, unfortunately, but yes, it's I think Dr. Jung would call it the spirit of the age as opposed to the spirit of the depths. So the spirit of the age forces us to do things. Like when World War I got going, the spirit of the age in Germany was, let's all go out and get our uniforms and get our guns. And so he talked about when he crossed the frontier between France and Germany, or France and Switzerland, I think. And he said everybody was in a very festive mood. They were celebrating, oh boy, we're going to have a war, goody, goody. And of course, then, 8 million men were killed in the trenches, something like that. So
I saw the same thing happen with our first Gulf War, where in my local community, there were people out there holding up signs praising the start of the war.
Yeah.
And of course, my generation went through Vietnam, and we were like, "Whoa, what do you?
Yeah, what do you think you're getting in?
You know what you're getting into here."
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's the way it works. So Taurus says, as the youngest in my family, I can definitely feel the scapegoat projection on me. I have lots of unconscious guilt. I have no doubt about that. I mean, I used to hive off my guilt on my brother, which is maybe why so many families are dysfunctional. If you're under the influence of the collective unconscious, you're going to do irrational things you won't be able to explain your motivations, but you won't have to explain your motivations. And Andreas, I think that from Dr. Jung's point of view, he was talking about psychic epidemics. And basically, that's what you're describing here is a psychic epidemic, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'm not a professional. Maybe you are. You won't have to explain your motivations because everyone else is on the same page as you. They're doing the same irrational religious practices that they find meaningful. And I guess what Dr. Jung would say is that religious practices per se, probably he would say, are not irrational, are not stupid, in the sense that religious practices, regardless of religion, have been developed archetypally through human consciousness for thousands of years. All of them have. And they all have worked as psychic systems to help people through difficult times of various sorts. You know, a good example would be confession in the Catholic Church, where you can get rid of your guilt by going to see the priest, and the priest gives you some penance and says, okay, you're absolved now. And then you can get rid of your guilt that way. And so those were all psychic technologies, I think. Although religious statements are, you know, often don't comport with the physical world. They don't comport with the scientific method. They do have, the fact that we need meaning in our lives is significant.